Ladies and gentlemen, the presentation is starting. Michael, please go ahead.
Thank you, George, and welcome everyone to today's eSeminar event, Creating IT SLAs, Knowing How and Where to Start. And today's event is brought to us by Uptime Software. This is Michael Krieger, CEO of MRK Marketing, and there's nothing new about SLAs. Still, there are a ton of different ways to track and report both infrastructure and business service SLAs. And the type of metrics and reporting that you require to create, track, and report those SLAs may require fundamental re-architecture of how applications are managed, or you might run the risk of losing sight of the application forest through the infrastructure tree. So how do you get started with SLAs in this crazy heterogeneous IT environment? Where is point A and how do you get to point B? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Very happy to have with us Alex Bewley, who is the Chief Technology Officer for Uptime Software. But before we get going, let me remind all of you that these are interactive events and we incorporate many social networking tools as well. You can tweet or post info onto social media sites like blogging platforms, bookmarking sites, social news sites, etc., all from the console. Just scroll along the bottom of the screen and click on the Share This widget. You can also submit questions at any time using the Ask Question button on your interface. We'll get to as many of them as we can during our Q&A session, and ones that we don't have time for, we'll get a written response after the event. You can also use that green Resources widget to download a copy of the slides, and every window you see, from the slide window to the Q&A window, can be enlarged or collapsed. So if you want to change the look and feel of your console, go knock yourself out, play with it, have fun. Finally, when we're done, we'd appreciate if you completed our post-webcast survey to let us know how you liked this event. You'll see the link when the event completes in the lower right hand of the screen. So now just a little bit about today's speaker. Alex Bewley, as I mentioned, is the CTO for Uptime, a technologist by trade. He left a successful career at Sun Microsystems to co-found Uptime in 2001. And while not striving for the most efficient and elegant solutions that seamlessly combine effectiveness, value, and beauty, which I think any software designer should go for, you can find them either competing as a triathlete or flying a Cessna. So we've got about an hour. We've got a lot to cover. Let me turn it over to our speaker today, Alex Bewley. Go ahead, Alex.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And certainly, I don't think I'm that interesting in real life compared to for that introduction. As was said, I've been CTO and co-founder of Uptime. I've been doing it for about 15 years now. I just want to give you some background as to why am I talking about what we're talking about today. Certainly, I have traveled the world meeting all kinds of customers in all sorts of industries and of all sizes, certainly from hundreds of servers into tens of thousands. So I've seen all different kinds of environments out there. And certainly, I've seen all sorts of crazy things as well. And one thing continues to amaze me, and that is, given all of this wonderful technology like the internet and virtualization and cloud computing, VDI, virtualized storage, and a raft of other really cool technologies, we still continue to have the same problems in systems management that we had 30 years ago. Where is stuff running? How's it doing? When's it going to break? And how can we stop that from happening again? Or more viscerally, how can I stop being yelled at as the IT guy? Mm-hmm. So, with the advent of all these new technologies, the problem is actually getting worse and not better. So we almost have a bit of a Schrodinger's cat problem in systems management. Things are changing so quickly, if we even look at something to see if it's working properly, are we actually going to break it? So today's chat or today's talk, it's not a vendor pitch. So I just want to say, as much as I do work for a systems management company, today's chat is very, very informative in nature and is not a vendor slideware. So I want to make that perfectly clear.
That's refreshing. Thanks.
As much as the marketing people would love for me to pitch you, that's not going to happen. So, which brings us to what we're chatting about today, right? And you heard the introduction, and really our presentation today is about service level agreements and how they manifest themselves in an IT world. And one of the things that I would really like to cover off today is talking about some terminology and some higher level discussion around what kinds of SLAs that there are, because there are all sorts of different kinds of discussions to be had. I'm also going to talk about, BSM and what it means, or business service management, what it means for people in IT. Things like and then also how to decompose an application for SLA reporting and monitoring. How do we, create routines? How do we make SLAs part of our daily lives? How do we build credibility around SLAs? Certainly coming from an IT, an IT side of things. How do we stop being that reviled group of people that makes our lives difficult? And then how do we pull it all together? So, right here, I'm going to come to this quote in a minute here. So Peter Drucker is, a really interesting person. But certainly one of the things that we found when we talk about SLAs is when we say something or we have a term like service level agreements, people understand it in different ways. And I'll use this example of capacity planning. So when I say capacity planning, what do you think? A lot of people think, it's complex mathematical models that simulate load and throughput through a whole series of systems or group of systems. To a lot of other people, it's a chart with a trend line indicating that you're going to be out of disk space in 36 days, right? So I use this example because we hear it all of the time, right? Capacity planning is not always capacity planning. And the same thing goes with SLAs. What exactly do we mean? So let's take a step back, and here's the quote from Peter Drucker, who's a very well-established, or was a very well-established business guru. What gets measured gets managed. And I completely agree with this. However, as probably a lot of you are very familiar, we can measure and manage lots of wrong things, especially in very, very complex IT environments. And this is compounded by the very nature of us being IT people. We see the world through rose-tinted glasses, right? So how do we deal with this, right? Well, one is we come to e-seminars like this to try and learn different ways of looking at the world. How do we see it in a different manner? And also, how do we get insight, or what do we need to do to get some insight into what kinds of things we should be measuring and managing? So coming to SLAs, so again, sort of the terminology, or when we say SLAs or service level agreements, we can mean, again, different kinds of things. So what I've done, or how generally we've discussed SLAs, or when I talk to sort of people in the industry, there are three different kinds, or three major kinds of categories: contractual, service desk-based, and infrastructure-based. And contractual, really, I would consider these to be higher level. And there are a few kinds of these kinds of categories. So, for example, outsourced, right? So let's say you outsourced part of your organization or your IT organization to something like IBM Global Services, Wipro, or even a smaller managed service provider. Contractual could also be an application or infrastructure provider, something like a Salesforce.com or Amazon's Web Services or AWS. It could also be a small application service, something like an Evernote, Dropbox, or any number of web-based services. So in all of these cases, under contractual SLAs, you're negotiating terms of service and expectations. And it's a pretty involved process, and certainly around outsourcing. Right? There's a very defined set of things that you step through in terms of expectation and service delivery. The next kind of SLA that we tend to talk about is what we call service desk-based. So these tend to be more ticket-based. For example, you're calling into your service desk, or a customer's calling into a call center, and it'd be things like activating a cell phone when a customer walks into a store, right? Or it could be deploying a system in-house, which would include things like purchasing, configuring, installing the applications, security testing it, and putting it into production. Right? You don't actively monitor that. That's something that, or a sequence of workflows that happen. Or another example of a service-based SLA is bringing new staff on board, creating accounts, setting up the security policies and assigning a phone, for instance. Right? All of these are activities that you want to know how long they take and are they being done reliably. And really the last kind of SLA is probably the one that we are most familiar with, certainly as IT people, and this is infrastructure-based. Right? It tends to involve application applications you monitor, systems you monitor, reporting or analyzing outages and reporting outages within your IT infrastructure. And really what you're doing is you're trying to ensure that IT services are working in a reliable fashion, right? So, the challenge coming from the IT infrastructure world is, and this is really an evolution of capability, is trying to understand, how do we measure complex workflows, right? And certainly workflows that involve people and process. And this is where service desk reporting comes into play, right? So one of the things that's really important here is how, from my infrastructure world, do I understand some higher level things like complicated workflows. So for example, using a standard monitoring tool set that you probably already have, or an ITSM monitoring tool set, how do you monitor something that takes a very long time? So let's use a healthcare example, like requesting an MRI or an X-ray. So in this case, a doctor would request an exam, the image gets taken, it would be analyzed, stored, posted to a healthcare management system, and then is retrieved by the doctor. There's infrastructure involved in every component, a scheduling system, an image or diagnostic imaging system, email, that kind of thing. But the entire process can take a day or many, many, many days. So the business metrics around this would be, how long is it taking to process the MRIs or X-rays, analyze them, and were there any exceptions to this? How do you actually answer this from an infrastructure point of view? Right? You can have application availability for each app involved, but there probably isn't a holistic metric. So your challenge, certainly from the IT side of things, is how do you go about asking the right questions to understand how to monitor this kind of complicated workflow?
And Alex, it sounds to me like a combination of business process optimization coupled with infrastructure SLAs. It's I'd never really thought about it, but there are lag times involved, obviously, and how long does it take after someone receives something before it gets done and all that. But I never thought about the different components in something like that. That is really a challenge.
Well, and that's what I'm going to chat about over the next few slides, and it is a challenge. It's one of those things that takes us out of our zone of comfort because, in an IT world, we really, things are contained and automated, and they're dealing with systems. Certainly, as soon as you involve people, everything gets messed up.
Yep.
And that's just the harsh reality of it. And that's how do we deal with that in a very effective manner.
Yeah, it would be so easy without all those darn users.
Very true, but then none of us would be around in that case. So, what we're trying to show here, or really what we're talking about. So I'm introducing this term here. Well, I'm not introducing the term, but certainly BSM has come up, and some of you may be familiar with BSM, but a lot of you may not. Certainly coming from an infrastructure side of the world, and again, it's when I've talked to people and said, well, what do you think BSM is? I've gotten a whole series of different kinds of answers. And again, I just wanted to try and sort of contain this definition and really set the stage for, what is it we're trying to do from an IT talking to business talking to the business units. So BSM, or business service management, as we would define it, is sort of a business-centric view of services provided to business users or customers, and it sits above ITSM, or IT service management, right? So it's not necessarily something that you integrate with at an infrastructure level. It's an overriding theme or view that you would have that sits on top of all of your service desk and infrastructure-based monitoring. So really what we're trying to do is change how we look at applications and flip from a technological view to a consumer or customer point of view. And again, the hardest part of this is, as infrastructure people, it involves people and process, and it becomes very, very messy in that regard. Also, properly implementing BSM involves understanding business workflows and the architecture of applications, and that can get very, very complicated. I mean, I've witnessed it. I've talked to lots of IT people over the past number of years, and there are all sorts of challenges about bringing up or elevating the types of monitoring that you or ITSM that you do. So there's lots and lots of challenges in that regard. So what is it that we're actually trying to achieve? So bringing it back down, what's truly important, right? So it's trying to make sure that we, being IT and business, are talking the same language. So here's an example. Let's say that you're a mobile cellular company and you bill for ringtones that people pick, right? So people can punch little codes onto their smartphones or their phones and select random ringtones. The business metrics are when someone requests a ringtone, are we billing them? Are they getting the ringtone that they picked? And is it being provisioned within a fixed period of time? Right? These are all very simple and high-level business questions. But from an infrastructure point of view, all the underlying systems underneath may indicate the process is working. The billing system might be functional. You can log into it. You can tap to the web front end. The server that hosts the ringtones might be working. And the network infrastructure, the IT network infrastructure, as long as the cellular infrastructure, might be fine. But are you actually able to capture or answer the question, did the user receive what they paid for? Right? So again, a simple business question, hey, am I getting what I paid for? From an IT point of view, that's actually a relatively difficult question to answer. And I use this example because I do know of a company that was billing users for ringtones. So the users were picking their ringtones and they were getting billed on their bills, but the ringtones weren't getting provisioned. And yet all of the underlying monitoring indicated that everything was okay. The problem was this was a business logic error. So all of a sudden, how in IT are you supposed to capture business logic errors? And I'll bring in another example here as well. Right? So this was a rather uncomfortable customer meeting that I sat in on. And essentially, we were relatively new to the account and were brought in to help implement SLA reporting. That's what we do. And the meeting was interesting because it was between the CIO of a mobile phone company and their outsourcer. And it was really a classic case of two people talking about completely different things. They thought they were talking about the same thing, but they actually weren't. So the outsourcer was demonstrating a dashboard to the CIO and indicating that, hey, as the CIO, you can see all the outages in all your various regions of the business. And all of you have seen this dashboard. It's the little pretty map of the world, and it's got the little red and green dots on it, and maybe a list of outage events that slide down the side. So the CIO then asked, okay, well, I see there's a few outage messages on the dashboard. What are they? And it was, these are file system capacity related. And the CIO sat there and said, well, why is that important to me? How is that even important? What revenue generating application is that impacting? Show me what it means. And this just kept going on and on and on, right? The outsourcer was saying, well, no, we're reducing file system capacity errors. We're helping you in those business services. And the CIO said, I think we're on different planets here. How are these file system capacity outages impacting any revenue generating application? He wanted the visibility into those really, really critical apps. So it was really, really interesting in terms of, wow, we both think we're talking about BSM, and yet they are very, very radically different conversations. And again, as IT, it's important to understand when people talk about business problems or people talk about business metrics, it's not necessarily what we are used to, right? So, before you become completely overwhelmed with, oh my goodness, I'm never going to be able to figure this out, can we actually achieve true business service management, right? And that's actually very, very hard to do. I would say there are very few organizations who have been able to do this very, very well. Now, again, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't give up. It just means that you should start to demonstrate progress, or at least demonstrate that you can come to the table and explain or understand the problems that business is having. Right? So how do we go about achieving this? Right? So you need to know a lot about the applications, and this is independent of the types of technology that the applications are, but actually what are they trying to do? What are the applications doing, and are they interacting with customers, or are they supporting parts of the business that are revenue generating, right? And how do we go about analyzing these applications? And sometimes you aren't going to know everything. They could be outsourced apps. You may not have access to a lot of components of them. They could be really, really vendor-specific, black box type applications. Some vendors don't give you information about how their applications work. And sometimes the apps are just really, really complicated. For example, I know of one company's IT department, and quite literally, I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but they had to wait until users called in with a problem to know if it was down. And really, they couldn't automatically monitor the application. And as it turns out, they just didn't understand how the vendor application worked, and they didn't scratch the veneer to figure out what was actually going on. So you can berate them for saying, hey, that's kind of silly to wait for users to call in when it goes down, but at the same time, the vendor was holding them hostage, and they couldn't actually figure out how to monitor the app. So at the end of the day, why did I even bring up business service management, right? Because you may not be there. It may be too complicated. And this is all a perfectly reasonable position to be in. Really what I'm doing is I just want to simply set the stage for the things that you should be thinking about when you interact with the business and how you should be creating your own SLAs. So I believe, I think we have a poll after this slide. Is that the case?
We do indeed, and let me remind you, if you have pop-up blockers, to hold down your control key as we launch our polling question, because we want to know if you know what revenue is being generated by your apps or how much an application outage costs you from a business perspective. So let us know one way or another. And, this is all complicated, don't you think, with today's move to cloud computing, whatever that means to you? Because, of course, I asked 3 people, you get 4 answers for cloud. So with applications, and as you mentioned, being hosted off-site now or even in virtualized configurations, does that add another level of complexity in trying to understand all of this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the world just gets more and more and more complicated, right? And it's how do you start to identify all of these touch points that exist out there? I mean, it is, a lot of people have been struggling just to implement CMDBs to track what they have.
Right.
You go and inject in highly virtualized and dynamic environments, highly dynamic cloud environments where your CMDB could be changing many, many times an hour, and then trying to track your outages and your root cause is just it makes you want to pull your hair out. So it's how do we start to implement different ways of looking at what actually matters? Because at some point we're going to hit a stage where we're simply not going to be able to monitor everything. Mm-hmm. And it's distilling what is the most important thing to gather.
Absolutely. Let me also remind everyone in attendance, you can submit your questions to Alex at any time. We've got a few in the queue already, but we can't answer yours until you send it in. So please do that if you'd like to get it answered today or after the event. And let's take a quick look at the results of the poll. And I think we have the right audience, considering not even really just about an eighth of them say they even really know what revenue is being generated or how much an app outage costs. I mean, I see where, airlines, with their reservation systems or an Amazon would understand that. But is this pretty much the rule, Alex? Do we just not know?
Well, yeah, again, it's we're not maliciously ignorant, by any stretch of the imagination. It's just there is almost a barrier between business and IT, and again, it's not out of neglect. It's just that we talk different languages, and certainly one of the other challenges that people have is, certainly people in IT, is when you go and talk to someone in business and say, I want to do better. I want to understand what are your key metrics. I need to better, understand your workflows. A lot of times business doesn't necessarily know. And again, this really depends on the size of your business, right? Obviously, if you're a much larger organization, you'll have architectural councils, you'll have architecture documents of your workflows, you'll be testing them. As you get smaller, you just don't have the luxury of those kinds of additional people or departments. Mm-hmm. So it's how do you best navigate defining the most important things to capture so that you continue to make money, which is really what or continue to deliver an effective and available service.
Right. Great point. All right, I'll turn it back over to you. And thanks, and let me again remind everyone, get your questions in the queue so we can respond to them. Go ahead, Alex.
All right. So let me come to the next slide here.
Here you go.
So what I want to look at here, and what I'm going to chat about is, this sounds like decomposing an application. So this is not CSI. Actually, well, I guess it is to a certain degree. So it's not a decomposing application, though. And this is going to be difficult for a number of you, right? And it's identifying, well, one, certainly, you may have hundreds of applications, right? So you're going to have to start to prioritize, well, what do I even start to look at? There are going to be varying degrees of business and revenue criticality. Now, having said this, it's going to be a very valuable task to go through if you haven't already done so. So when you're inventorying your applications, and again, the reason you want to do this is so that you can create SLAs around your applications. Is what does it do, and how do people interact with it? I mean, there's all kinds of nowadays it's far more web-based apps or browser-based apps, but there are still tons of mainframe and host-based applications out there with green screen scrapers and all of that kind of thing. So how do you actually interact with the app? And ultimately, if you had to distill it down, what really are the key business metrics, right? Is it dollars per hour? Is it transactions per minute? Is it claims per day? All these different kinds of things. You have to sit down and say, all right, well, what exactly is it? And this is different from our IT view of the world, which is, well, no, I log in and then I click this button and then I fill out this form, and that should take no more than 7.2 seconds and whatnot. I mean, that's all very important, and you have to do that. But if your flow through your application is not giving you the dollars or the answers you need, it doesn't matter how fast you're doing it. There's something that's underlying that is incorrect, right? So certainly as well is, from a touch point or risk point of view, right, is, where are people actually coming into your application? What is your application actually touching? Is it really old code or very old systems? I mean, it's interesting when you scratch the veneer of a lot of data centers and find out what age of technology is sitting out there for some of your very key business applications. Old tandem systems, that are years off maintenance, or old Sun Spark 2s that still drive very, very small components of your infrastructure, but possibly very, very key revenue components. And certainly one thing you need to do as well is, from an application point of view, is there a document? Is there an architecture document? And I say probably not in quotes, because, again, I was chatting with a CIO, and he was berating his one of his divisions and saying, I really wish they would come and monitor my applications properly and see how they're built and see how they're designed. And I flat out asked, I said, well, where are the architecture documents that they can refer to? And he says, well, that's interesting because we're kind of weak in that area. So, as IT, you also have to stand up to some of the businesses too, and say, look, we can only do as good a job as you disclose to us how your applications work, what your workflows are. How's the application built, right? Again, identifying, are there custom or insular components, right? Obviously, if there are shared or open or well-known middleware components, or they're API accessible, it's much, much easier to tap into the application and understand, how is it working. So things like if it's API accessible, you can start to pull out, the transactions per minute or types of transactions, that sort of interesting thing. And certainly as well, this is where, from an IT point of view, where we are very, very strong, right? What infrastructure does the application sit on? Is it internal? Is it external? Storage, network? Do we have cloud dependencies? Do we have interesting service dependencies? Are we sitting on operationally mature platforms? Mainframes have been around for a long time. They just work, right? Web 2.0 technologies sometimes don't always work, for scalability issues or really net new code. And certainly one component that tends to be overlooked is, are there key dependencies in your infrastructure, right? So will an outage in one component take out many applications? And ultimately, when you're doing a large dashboard or network operations center dashboard, you need to very quickly prioritize this. This is also known as event correlation or quick root cause identification. So one of the things you also want to look for is, can you prioritize, in the case of multiple outages, which components you want to work on and multiple failures? For example, if you have 2 database failures, would your DBAs or your level 2 people know which is a revenue critical application versus something less important? Because generally what would just show up on your event screen is database 1 is down, database 2 is down, with very little contextual information around, well, database 1 is actually our customer self-care system. Database 2 is an R&D type system, obviously a much lower priority. And one other one which I'd like to point out here is sort of cloud dependencies. Some businesses may completely lock this down and it's not an issue, but in others, it's an issue and you may not even know about it. Really, and I find this one interesting because it's also very, very subversive. So I was chatting with the CIO of a Fortune 500 company, and what they wanted to do was they wanted to do a survey of all external applications that their users within their organization were using. And he said, okay, we have only authorized as a corporation 13 external cloud-based providers, right? So we've only signed off on our employee community of tens of thousands of users using 13 cloud-based providers. So what they did was they monitored all of their global internet access points for a month and then combed the logs to see what services their user community or their employee community had been using. And they found over 250 different cloud-based providers. So at that point, one, they realized they had no control, right? So, even though we've said only 13 providers can be used, there are 250 out there. And the problem now becomes, certainly for the CIO, is if internal applications that are now becoming revenue critical or customer facing get built using these external services, how can you possibly monitor and control these things reliably, right? And certainly, and this is completely leaving aside data privacy issues and contractual issues, SLAs with those providers, right? So when you do find applications internally, what weird and wonderful things are they actually dependent on? So flipping into, again, sort of stepping down some more in terms of SLA routines, right? So we've talked about what are the things that are important, or what are the discussions that are important to have with business, right? What does BSM mean? How do we look at applications to identify sort of critical components to them? But now, how do we actually blend SLAs into our sort of daily IT lives? So how do we build SLAs that work? And I put in brackets mostly because, again, it's very difficult to lock this down. Again, we're in a very transient kind of environment. And all I'm trying to posit here is that we want to claw our way out of an infrastructure-centric view of the world and try to present information in a way that helps us know when we are delivering the applications that we're supposed to, and we get a heads up on when things might not be going to plan, right? So we build our SLAs in tiers. Think of, for all my given sets of applications or business divisions, what are critical tests for the applications, right? Can they be actively monitored? Or is it a complex workflow where you may have to capture information that is collected out of band or out of sequence? How do we prioritize our applications? Do we identify revenue or customer critical applications? How do we quickly communicate outage information as it relates to critical applications? Obviously, for example, we're a big Salesforce.com user, and Salesforce 10 years ago used to go out on a relatively frequent basis, which was very annoying. Nowadays, they have a complete trust.salesforce.com site where you can browse to see how available their applications have been, but they have a very defined communications mechanism for communicating if something looks like it's going wrong, if something is going wrong, how quickly it's going to be addressed, and when it will be fixed, right? So they've become very, very good at communicating outage information as it relates to the components that we use as a business, right? So SLAs as well. How do you report on application availability, right? So in some cases, you're going to have to do blended reporting, right? And that's the combination of active monitoring and analysis of your service desk data. Can you automate reporting from the service desk, right? So rather than have a real-time monitoring system with offline Excel people in a back room trying to crunch reports, can you actually blend these two together and get your monitoring system to scrape some service desk data and create some perhaps more active alerts on this? And certainly one of the things you can look at as well is can you combine these two data sources of infrastructure monitoring and service desk into what I would call a performance and availability data warehouse, right? So you can start to build different kinds of reports that blend both kinds of data. One of the other things that we generally need to look at as well is can you backtest your SLAs, right? So this one's actually really important because if you're new to SLAs or you're new to trying to understand how your applications are working, is people really tend to overestimate availability percentages, right? So 5 nines availability is really, really expensive and really, really hard to deliver, especially at an application level. Again, because technology goes wrong, people go wrong far more frequently, right? I don't know anybody who can give me 5 nines availability. Also, what we tend to think about or forget about are things like maintenance windows, right? So, if everybody in your call center goes home at 9 p.m., there's no reason for that call center app to be up. You can take it down and mangle it all you like. There's no reason to have 5 nines or 3 nines 24/7. You can have 3 nines between 9 and 5, or 9 and 9, or however you want to break it down. So again, it's thinking about what do you actually need to deliver, right? So in terms of back testing, it's the ability to look at your availability data over time, look at your service desk data over time, and say, you know what, we've actually only been available about 85% of the time, and it's caused us X amount of pain, right? So that's my baseline. I want less pain, so I want to bump up my availability to 90%. And one of the things that I need to do in order to get there. But if you upfront commit to a very high percentage of availability, you may be shooting above or punching above your weight, and that's just going to cause grief for everybody. Certainly as well, sorry, that's what I want to talk about. Oop. Sorry about that, I clicked on the wrong button here. One other thing I want to address is how can proactively watching SLAs help you out, right? So let's say we've built up a series of SLAs. We've built up a series of how we monitor our applications. So what do we need to do? Or how do we catch things before they become too critical, right? So can we have some leading indicators that things might be going wrong in our environment before we violate an SLA, right? So, can we afford 5 consecutive minutes of outage, or can we afford 1 minute 5 times a day? Try to understand what exactly is going on. As well, in, let's say, highly available environments, it's okay to have nodes in your cluster blow up because you're not affecting your service because you have other nodes delivering the service. Mind you, if 3/4 of them go down and it takes a very long time for end users to get access to their data, that might be construed as a service level violation. So the data may be there, half your infrastructure may be missing, but you're still violating service times. So you've kind of got to understand what's going on. How can I get some lead time to help diagnose these problems? And generally what we've seen, and again, this is sort of in a mid-enterprise, small business, mid-enterprise, departmental level, is create tiger teams, right? So what can you do on a daily basis to help you reduce outage or understand what's going on from an infrastructure or service desk point of view or application point of view? So this would be things like getting daily reports and having daily ops reviews in the morning. So here's our list of critical applications. Here are some leading indicators of problems that might be occurring within these applications. Let's start to prioritize what we need to fix. Or if things are broken, again, this is IT. Things break. Nothing is ever perfect, right? So what do we actually have to prioritize? And really where this becomes very important, and certainly the tool sets that you would use, is you want to figure out what I call causal high priority problems, right? So there's a system which crashes every single day that you're dependent on, right? You can reboot it every day, but that's probably not the best way to go about solving the problem, right? So, or if there's a database which fills up all of the time. So, try and figure out if a particular service is actually impacting lots of different applications or lots of different components of an application, right? And if something keeps coming up, redesign it, right? So, life is normal. You're having your regular set of outages, but your tools, your ITSM tooling is saying, you know what? I'm seeing this particular problem over and over and over and over, right? So you can continue to beat your head against the wall. That's your prerogative. Or you can go back and readdress it, right? And this can be done in a bit of a double-edged sword way. And I'm going to use a customer example here. And one of their problems was they had their huge NetApp filer environment, and they kept hitting file system capacity limits in a lot of their virtual machines. They have thousands of virtual machines. And what was happening is as they triggered critical file system capacity limits, alerts would go off, and then the sysadmins would have to deal with these kinds of alerts. And so what they did is they said, well, let's be smart. We're going to create automations to auto-grow our file systems, subject to some business rules. And what they did was they reduced their service desk load or their sysadmin load by 600 tickets a month. So they said, well, this is a win. We have 600 less tickets a month that we got to deal with. I don't know if that's a win because you're really just masking the underlying problem. That is, your file systems just keep filling up. You should probably be looking at some root cause, right? Are you not doing centralized logging? Are your applications running out of control? There are different ways to attack this problem. And certainly, when you get these root cause problems, you can also assign them to different team members. You have a meta team that kind of understands how everything works together, so you can go and take a look at those. All right, so I believe we have another poll.
We do indeed. So once again, if you need to, please hold down your control keys. We want to know how you're using SLAs right now. Are you just have service desk? Do you have infrastructure only? Do you have both? You're not using either but hoping to start during the next year, or are you not using them and you just don't have any plans because you just don't really care about your users? No, I don't think you really don't care about your users because you're not being pressured to, I guess, would be the way to do it. And, it's kind of hard, Alex, in this day and age for me to see, other than very small enterprises, obviously, where there is no pressure to deliver SLAs. This was something that used to be in the realm of the the CSCs of the world to come and deliver that kind of stuff. Today, it's expected from virtually every IT organization, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely, and certainly over the years that we have been, a systems management vendor, really what we've seen is an evolution from chaos to sophistication.
Okay.
But everybody has to come from chaos, and really SLAs has been one of those interesting things where it requires a bit of education. I know I need to do SLAs. I've been told to do SLAs, but I'm unsure of where to start or how to go about doing it or what's actually really important. And so, that's part of why we're talking about this today.
Sure.
But certainly, it's just raising that awareness. How do I know what's going on?
Well,
but certainly, as we can see, not a lot of people are not doing SLAs.
Or at least they're planning to if they're not doing them now. But under 10% say they have no plans, and interesting to see the mix of those who are doing both service desk infrastructure, service desk or infrastructure only are about tied. About between those who aren't doing them yet and have no plans whatsoever, less than 40% overall. It's probably a good thing. So thank you all for participating in that poll. And Alex, I'll turn it back over to you to continue.
Certainly, and just keeping an eye on the time here, I will not motor through, but I will wrap up more succinctly here. And so let me just push the audience here. So now that we've talked about from a high level of what BSM is, how do we inventory applications, how do we decompose them, how should we approach SLAs, what kinds of SLAs are there, and really it's a matter of it's opening up that conversation, right, and getting the respect that we need. And I say respect in my best Ali G accent here, right, and it's what are the things that we need to do to start to come to the table to have the conversations, right? And there's a bit of what I would call hygiene, right? And that is you need to take care of the small stuff first, right? So going to business and saying, you know what, I saw this great presentation. I know the questions I want to ask you. I have a different way. I have an enlightened way of looking at my infrastructure. Help me out. And the snide answer back could be, you guys can't keep anything up. Come back and talk to me once you have your act together. And again, you really do. You've got to have hygiene, right? It's one of those things, right? Like you don't get rewarded for showing up to meetings wearing deodorant, but people sure notice when you don't, right? So we look at this the same way, right? So you have to monitor your infrastructure. You've got to understand how everything works. You've got to make sure you're as available as possible. And certainly as well is don't aim too high. I know this sounds kind of silly to say, but you really have to understand what you're committing to, right? And certainly, and see if you can backtest, right? Can you actually introspect, well, what's happened in the past? So if I say I want this application to be available 99% of the time, are you even close to being able to deliver that, right? And certainly as well as make it an iterative approach, right? So aim for incremental improvements and be able to demonstrate that you are improving, right? So there's different ways of looking at outages, right? You will have those colossal failures, right? And a big application can crash, or a vendor takes down an app. You have no control over that, right? And it could be very difficult to get going again. But those are once in a blue moon times of crashes. Really where you're going to feel the most pain are what we call the death by 1,000 cuts kind of outages, right? It's a service that needs to be restarted all the time, or it's running out of file system capacity, or it's peculiar kinds of network outages, right? So how do you identify those continually recurring problems, fix them, and then wipe them off your plate? Get closer and closer to starting to deal with those really big, crazy problems. And, overcome the fear of transparency. And this one sounds really quite funny, but yeah, it's really painful to have outages. But really the intent is, if you can communicate, we are having issues, here's where we're having issues, here's how we're dealing with them, and here's when we expect to have them fixed. right? And ultimately, over the years, and fortunately it's changing, but when I would talk to ID departments and say, hey, you know what, how do you approach presenting your availability data? And you can divide people into two camps. Those that recognize transparency was for the best, but albeit they would get beaten up, they get yelled at, but at least business people had some insight into, okay, well, at least I know what the challenges are, and I can work with them to help reduce these challenges. And then there are those that just wanted to hide it. I mean, I was at a number of calls where people would just flat out say, yeah, we know we have a ton of issues, but we don't want to communicate those to the business. It's just that's kind of the way it is. And that used to be 50-50 going back 6-7 years. Nowadays, it's considerably less. The older school camp is starting to go away because people are realizing that, well, one, they're just going to get outsourced. If you're that stick-in-the-mud guy, you're just going to get outsourced because there are application vendors or service providers out there who are transparent and are doing their best to try and provide people the best kinds of SLAs that are available. How do we pull it all together? I know I wouldn't say vendor pitch, but I'll just give the quick little overview here of what we are. That is, unified monitoring is a really key component to being able to deliver higher order SLAs, right? You need to be able to understand what's going on in your infrastructure, in a heterogeneous environment across many different kinds of technologies, across many different kinds of virtualization technologies, cloud providers, applications, all of those wonderful things, right? So our tool Uptime, it does all of those. We are that performance and availability data warehouse. We obviously encourage you to come take a look at us. But unified monitoring is the key component, right? And I believe we have a webinar online that was done a few weeks ago that talks about the importance of unified monitoring, right? And again, it's that ability to aggregate all of the data into meaningful SLA reports. And certainly one of the things that we can offer you, free 30-day trial. You can download it and try it out in a few minutes. It's a unified monitoring solution. And you can start to get that baseline information for getting your IT SLAs or getting your higher order SLAs in place. And certainly go check out the website, go email our salespeople. They'll be more than happy to chat to you and help you down that path. So in conclusion, and I believe off to the sides of your screens, you will see a whole series of resources that are available to you, and I'll let Michael talk to that in a little bit. But thank you very much for your time, and I hope you found this informative. And by all means, please contact us if you do have more questions. We're more than willing to chat with you.
Thanks very much, Alex. And let's get to some of the questions we have in the queue right now, and keep them coming, because if we don't have time for them, we'll send them to Alex's email, which is right there on the screen, and he'll have to answer them after the event for you. So there. So let's start with a question from Bill, who says, have you seen DR RTOs as part of SLAs? Normally, operational up-down time is included, but have you seen SLAs including DR as well?
Oh, absolutely, right? And again, it's a different way, and it depends. I don't know if it's internal or outsourced, but certainly one of the key components you need. DR is obviously hard to actively monitor because, well, it's lights out or it's warm standby.
Exactly.
But most definitely, we've seen people. Again, this is part of the iterative approach. You're going to have to bring that stuff to life every once in a while. You're going to have to test it. I mean, it's akin to data centers lighting up their diesel generators every once in a while. You need to make that kind of thing works. Albeit, I can appreciate that's actually a relatively difficult thing to test without disrupting your business services. So what I have seen done is people who do put in place special DR testing plans where they will, if possible, in off hours, have all their monitoring and flip over to depends if it's a DR site or a DR standby, that kind of thing.
Okay, keep the questions coming. This one from Arsalan, who says, do you align IT SLAs with business key performance indicators, and how do you align them?
Well, again, it's aligning business KPIs can, well, again, it's a difficult term because it can be many, many different kinds of things, right? A key indicator of business is, margin or profit per type of product line or across an aggregate set of product lines. You can't really map IT to that. However, there will be key revenue applications that tap into that you can. So you have to try and figure out, okay, well, as IT, I am delivering an application which supports the delivery of services that allow the business to make profit. So, business, work with me to tell me what those are, right? Again, let's take insurance, right? It's a key metric is claims, right? How many claims per day or per hour can I process, right? And the historically have tended to be more batch type environments, right? So it's can I jam enough processing power into the batch queue to increase the number of claims per day? Obviously, the fewer claims you process, the less money you make. So that's more closely aligned kind of metric.
Keep the questions coming. Here's a really good question, something we have all battled with at one time or another. How do you find, and this is from David, he says, how do you find time for re-architecting recurring issues when the business only wants IT to work on new projects?
Well, I guess to be somewhat facetious, you can just let the old stuff die and see how long it takes to reprioritize. I say that because I've had it done to me, right? Where you say, look, I need you guys to work on X, Y, and Z. It's new and it's exciting. That's wonderful, and I get the pushback of, well, we need time to work on this. Yeah, don't worry about it. And you need the intestinal fortitude to step forth and say, no, you don't understand, right? If I don't spend time doing this, I or my team, whether there's 10 of us or 20 of us or 3 of us, we have to spend 5 hours a day every single day fixing this, right? So let's do the math, right? It's going to cost you $10,000 a day to ignore this problem. Or it's going to take us 5 days, 10 days, 20 days to go off, create a project, solve this problem once and for, buy new technology, upgrade the system, whatever it may be, and go back from there. And again, that's part of the transparency, right? It's telling people, it's educating people, and saying, this is the pain we feel, and this is why, right? And here's the data, right? Here it is in black and white. I'm not hiding anything. It takes us a lot of time to deal with these kinds of problems.
Absolutely. We probably have time for maybe just one more, so I'll give you another one from Rosalind, who says, it seems like a lot of organizations want to go to the cloud, but forget to optimize their operations before moving to the cloud. Moving broken operations to the cloud without considering optimization opportunities seems like a recipe for disaster. Your thoughts on that?
I agree 100%. No, and you're right. All you're doing is moving the problem from one data center to another. And certainly, and again, I can definitely speak to this because we have another offering, which is Uptime Cloud, which is cloud cost management for Amazon. And that is people deploy into the cloud and forget how expensive it can be, right? And if you have automatic provisioning, if you're moving your apps into the cloud or AWS in particular, and leave things running, don't right-size them, don't understand the workload profile of your applications, it will probably end up costing you more money at the end of the day.
That is a great point. So let's try and squeeze in one more, and keep them coming anyway, because we will get a written response to you after the event. This one comes from George, who says, as an IT manager, how do I start my credible conversation with the business units?
That's a good one. And again, not to be facetious, but sometimes candor really, really works. And that's a matter of going to them and saying, oh, why do you hate me so much? Right? And where am I, where do you feel that I am not delivering? And again, it's an example could be, and I'll pick a relatively trivial example. And that is, business says, email's not working. right? As IT, you can say, well, no, the network link is X packets per second and CPU usage is nominal. That's like talking French and English, right? The business guy doesn't care. He just says, I click send, receive, and nothing's happening, right? And the IT guy is sitting there, well, no, all my stuff seems to be working. So it's try and find those common threads of conversation and go to the business and say, look, you know what? I am going to present you with a dashboard or a weekly or a daily, weekly, or monthly report that shows how well we are doing running your applications. But it's incumbent on you to tell me what you think is important and not just, hey, it should work, right? It's trying to create some parameters around when should it work, how fast or slow should it be, what kind of data, all of those. Again, you're going to have to inventory what is important, but really it's structuring the conversation around what is important to them. Because as soon as you can start to talk that language, you become included in conversations. You become a far more critical player in delivering these kinds of things.
And with that, we've run out of time. I want to thank today's presenter, Alex Bewley, for a great discussion about SLAs and how to get started with them. If you'd like, you can download a copy of today's presentation. Also on that Resources tab, you'll find a white paper, information on how to start a free trial, and a little one-pager on driving data center efficiency. Also, if you joined us late, we'd love to share this with you again. We have recorded this and would like to share it with a colleague. You can just surf over to eseminarslive.com, and while you're there, take a look at our list of upcoming events as well. Also, we'd love your feedback, so if you could, please click on that survey tab on the lower right-hand corner of the screen and let us know how we can make these events better for you. My thanks to Uptime Software for making today's event possible. For Ziff Davis Enterprise on Quinn Street, this is Michael Krieger saying have a great day.